Hello everyone. Today we are going to look at a paper which came out in the year 2012, and this is one of the classical papers in the field of artificial intelligence. The title of the paper is ImageNet Classification with Deep Convolutional Neural Networks, and the author, one of the author is Geoffrey Hinton. The other of authors are Ilya and Alex. The surnames are difficult to pronounce for me. Um, and we'll come to why this paper has become so popular and why it has so many citations. I believe this was one of the first papers which introduced the concept that CNNs can actually be much deeper than what people have had been previously using and what they had been originally conceived for. And the idea of increasing the number of layers and taking the network very deep was first introduced by this paper, I believe. Also, it was a combination of a number of different things that they introduced. uh, I would say none of the techniques they have mentioned in this paper is completely novel, but the way the elements are arranged together, that had never been done before. It was the first time a paper was uh, using convolutional networks that were deep enough and using all these different tricks, um, and all of these combined together in a package which was written in this paper. uh, so it is a short paper. It is a very easy read. uh, I guess it had restrictions in the number of pages, uh, so that it could be submitted successfully to the conference. That's why they had to cut it short, but it makes for an easy read. So let's try to understand this seminal paper so that we put one more box to understand our journey of artificial intelligence, and hopefully there will come a point where we'll be able to connect all these boxes together in a nice way. Let's start with the abstract. So they have trained a deep convolutional neural network uh, to classify the 1.2 million high resolution images in the ImageNet LSVRC 2010 contest. The classification challenge was that okay, here are these 1.2 million images. Develop your model and try to predict which of these classes does this image belong to. And they achieved top 1 and top 5 error rates of 37.5% and 17%. Top 1 means that out of all the predictions uh, that your model has made for a particular image, with what error rate is the top 1 matching with the actual prediction. Top 5 means you look at the top 5 entries and you're okay if any one of the top 5 entry matches. So obviously the error rate would be a bit lower because it is a lenient scale over there. However, this network performed better than the previous state of the art. These error rates were completely unseen before, and everyone was pleasantly surprised that okay, we can reach these error rates using neural networks. The network itself was quite big. It had 60 million parameters, 6 lakh 50,000 neurons. We look at the architecture, but essentially it had 5 convolutional layers, 3 fully connected layers, and a final 1000-way softmax. Now they have implemented some neat tricks to make sure that the error rates drop even further. We are going to look at different tricks uh, and some tricks to reduce overfitting as well. So this challenge they had entered it into the 2012 competition as well. entered their network, and they had achieved a winning top 5 test error rate of 15.3 and 26.2%, which was excellent at that time. This was the second best entry actually. They achieved a top 5 error rate of 15.3%. So you can see the improvement is more than 10%, which is amazing. Okay, so let's go through the introduction. The current approaches to object recognition make essential use of machine learning methods. To improve their performance, we can collect larger data sets, learn more powerful models, and use better techniques for preventing overfitting. Interesting to know for me is that up until that year, very recently actually, data sets of labeled images were starting to get large. For example, previously NOR, Caltech, and CFAR data was very common, but recently these new large data sets include LabelMe and ImageNet. Now, it is also interesting to know that the actual ImageNet dataset has over 15 million labeled high resolution images in over 22,000 categories. In the ImageNet large scale visualization challenge, however, we take only 1.2 million images and only 1,000 classes. So, it is a subset of all the images that are out there. Again, ImageNet, I believe, is a phenomenal effort of collecting data because it was incredibly useful to test the effectiveness of different networks. And where we are right now is hugely thanks to uh, this data set and all these competitions which encouraged people to improve their network further and further. Now, obviously, we can, up until that point, that is 2012, uh, the networks were good enough to model, let's say, handwritten digits, because smaller size network could be enough, and their accuracy actually approached human performance, which was very good. However, images pose a very different challenge compared to handwritten text. It's because of the large scale variability, and recognizing them is very, very difficult. So, naturally, we cannot achieve this error rate. However, we need to try to do our best. And they are arguing that the current approaches are not good enough to recognize images. So they are saying that we need a model with a large learning capacity. So our model should have lots of prior knowledge to compensate for all the data that we don't have. Now, this is something I believe which is also called as inductive bias. We had looked at it in one of our earlier videos as well. Essentially, CNNs are one such class of model where there is an operation which kind of induces a bias in the network, which helps us because we are pre-feeding the network with some information which we do not necessarily get from all the images put together, which is important if the complexity of the object recognition task is so immense, right? Uh, the capacity of these CNNs can be controlled by varying their depth and breadth, and they also make strong and mostly correct assumptions about the nature of images. Up until that point, CNNs were definitely used for image recognition tasks, but I believe they were not deep enough. Let's see. Let's go ahead. Despite the attractive qualities of CNNs and despite the relative efficiency of their local architecture, they have still been prohibitively expensive to apply in large scale to high resolution images. The reason why the CNNs were not applied uh, in deep networks is probably because of two things. First is that people were worried about the problem of overfitting. If I have a very deep network, if I have a huge network, it shouldn't happen that the network is not trying to learn the correct function but simply trying to pass through all the data points. So, in other words, let's say these are the points that you have in the data, and let's say this is the actual function. What happens in overfitting is that you try to fit a function which passes through all these points. This is obviously not the correct representation, but it on the outset you get a training error which is very low, and however it's not a correct representation of the actual function which represents the network, or the problem that you're trying to solve. That's why overfitting is a very real problem, and I believe in the year 2012 people used to focus a lot on the problem of overfitting. Nowadays we do not talk about it that much in the papers that I have read recently, but still interesting to know. And then another problem was that the training time, it was extremely computationally expensive. They were actually the first ones, I believe, who have used a highly optimized GPU implementation of 2D convolution, uh, and they have made this available publicly. I think they are using the CUDA software, which was released and made public by NVIDIA. uh, GPU implementation took off, I guess, after this paper was released, because it offered a lot of advantages computationally as compared to traditional CPU operations. It allowed for computations to be done parallelly on a single GPU. Additionally, they have used multiple GPUs. They have used two different GPUs. So the CNN is running parallel in two different GPUs, and there is a cross connection as well. We are going to look at that in detail as well. So the specific contributions of this paper are: we trained one of the largest CNNs to date on the subset of ImageNet in both of these competitions. We wrote a highly optimized GPU implementation. Our network contains a number of new and unusual features which improve its performance and reduce its training time, which are detailed in section number 3. Two, because the size of the network is very high, they are already stating that overfitting can be a significant problem. So we use several effective techniques to prevent overfitting, which are described in section number 4. Also interesting that a large number of parameters are found in the fully connected layers, and convolutional layer, even though they account for less than 1% of the model parameters. So if there are 100 parameters, it would be hardly there would be one parameter in the CNNs, five CNNs combined, and there would be 99 in the three fully connected networks. But still, removing one CNN can result in an inferior performance. The network takes between 5 and 6 days to train on two GTX 580 3GB GPUs. So I always make a note of these timings which you see over here. The reason I make a note of them is that it helps me to compare how much time it used to take 10 years back, how much time it's taking right now. 5 to 6 days, 3 GB GTX 580 GPUs. I think right now coding on GPUs has become more easy and straightforward, but these people, I think, had handwritten all of the code, and it probably took a lot of time for them to enable parallel computations as well as cross communication between the two different GPUs that they were using. Uh, okay, so the dataset the dataset consists of 15 million labeled high resolution images compared to 22,000 categories. Uh, yes, we have already seen that. ImageNet consists of variable resolution images, while our system requires a constant input dimensionality. Therefore, they downsample the images to a fixed resolution of 256 by 256. When the actual training is performed, we'll see that this size is downsized even further to reduce the problem of overfitting. So we are going to look at that, but initially they are saying that they downsample the image to a fixed resolution of 256 by 256. given a rectangular image, we first rescaled the image such that the shorter side was of length 256 and then cropped out the central 256 cross 256 patch uh, from the resulting image. Okay. So now they mention about the architecture, which consists of 8 layers, 5 convolutional, and 3 fully connected layers. So let's look at the architecture. Okay, so this is the architecture that they have described in this particular paper. Let's have a look at it in detail. Firstly, we can see that there is one layer which is going on top, and there is one layer which is going on bottom. These are exactly the same layers, and both of these layers are run on different GPUs. So this is run on, let's say, GPU number one, and this is run on GPU number two. So what do these dotted lines mean? These dotted lines means cross communication between the different layers in the different GPUs. Okay, so we'll have a look at that again. For example, you can see there is a cross communication here and here. There is also a cross communication between the fully connected layers. Okay, so let's start to look at all these things. So this is the image, first image. The image size is 224 by 224. Okay, this is the input image that goes into the network. Now there is a filter that is applied, which is also called as a kernel. The size of the kernel is 11 by 11. So this is the image, and there is a kernel which slides through horizontally as well as vertically, and basically transform this image into a feature map. So what they have done here is that they have okay, so when this is transformed, the size is reduced, and how much the size reduces by depends on the stride that you are using. They are using a stride of 4 here, and they have got a size of 55 by 55 in the next layer. Now this operation you can do multiple times to extract more number of feature maps. They have done this operation 48 times, so they have got 48 different feature maps. So imagine after the image is fed and you apply the first filter of size 11 by 11, you get one feature map. You apply it multiple times with different weights, so that you get 48 different feature maps, which are mentioned here. So the resolution goes on decreasing. From 224, it has reduced to 55. Okay, so let's look at the next layer. In the next layer, you are again using a filter. The size of the filter, however, has reduced to 5 by 5, and you are extracting 128 features now instead of 48 features. So there are, sorry, 128 feature maps. Uh, right now, the resolution has decreased from 55 to 27. So you can see that the resolution is decreasing, but the number of feature maps are increasing as we are proceeding from one layer to the next layer. Then next we are applying a filter of 3 by 3. We are extracting 192 feature maps from the network, and the resolution is decreasing to 13 by 13. Again we apply the same filter of size 3 by 3, and again we get 192 feature maps with a resolution of 13 by 13. And then finally we again apply one more filter and get 128 feature maps with a resolution of 13 by 13. And then we apply these two convolutional neural networks, and finally a softmax layer at the end over here. The same thing that is happening at the bottom is also happening at the top. Few things to note here is that these two are run on two different GPUs. There is a cross connection only at certain places. So for example, you can see that there is no cross connection between this layer and this layer, but layer number 2 and layer number 3, there is a cross connection across GPUs. So that is interesting to me. The way they have coded these GPUs is that they don't enable cross communication for all the layers, but only for certain layers in the network. With this preliminary understanding, let us try to see what they have written in the architecture. So I'll just currently skip this a little bit. I'll go through this in detail. So this is the section of overall architecture. Okay, so the first five are convolutional, remaining three are fully connected. The output of the last layer is fed to a thousand-way softmax, which produces a distribution over thousand class labels. Okay, the kernels of the second, fourth, and fifth convolutional layers are connected only to those kernel maps in the previous layers which reside on the same GPU. The kernels of the third convolutional layer are connected to all the kernel maps in the second layer, which include both the GPUs, which we saw from the dotted lines. The neurons in the fully connected layer are connected to all the neurons in the previous layer. Okay, so far we have understood this section of the architecture. They also mention now, okay, the first convolution layer filters the 224 by 224 by 3 input image with 96 kernels. So 48 plus 48, 96 kernels of size 11 by 11 by 3 with a stride of 4 pixels, which is the difference between the receptive field centers of the neighboring neurons. So when this kernel is sliding over this image, there is a gap that you need to take between the different slides. So that gap is 4 pixels in this case. The second convolution layer takes as input the output of the first layer and filters it with 256 kernels. So 128 plus 128 becomes 256 with size of 5 by 5 by 48. So we can see 5 by 5 by 48. The third, fourth, and fifth convolution layers are connected to one another without any intervening pooling or normalization layers. We are going to look at these operations. The third convolution layer has 384 kernels, 120, 192 plus 192, of size 3 by 3 by 256. The fourth also has 384 layers, but the size is 3 by 3 by 192. And the fifth convolution layers has 256 kernels, so 128 into 2, that is 256, and the size is 3 by 3 by 192. The fully connected layers have 408 4096 neurons each, 2048 plus 2048. Now the top part of this image appears clipped for some reason. Maybe they wanted to reduce space in the overall PDF. Okay, so now let's look at some of the nice tricks that they have done in this paper to get this much impressive error rate. The first is the ReLU non-linearity. Now, if you look at a traditional neuron, the way people thought about it previously is like an impulse function. So if the activation is not there, the neuron will not spike. But if the activation reaches certain value, there will be a spike. This was based on a biological function. However, the problem with this is that this function saturates over here. The derivative is zero, so it takes a lot of time to train. So these people are using a ReLU function, which is basically it is zero if your if value is less than zero, and then it scales as the input like this. So the derivative is never zero in this case. You can see this is the ReLU function, and it trains much faster. So it achieves, let's say, an error rate of 25% in just 6 epochs as compared to 36 epochs for the tanh neurons. So there is a 6 times difference in the training rate. So ReLUs are much faster in their experience, and at that time I believe ReLUs were not very popular. You either used to use tanh functions or some other activation functions, but ReLUs was also introduced by Nair and Hinton, and they were referred to as rectified linear units. So this paper, I think, kind of made the usage of ReLUs more widespread, especially in the context of deeper networks where you have lot of uh, neurons to train, and the training time is significantly important, and small differences can actually amplify to create a big effect in how much time the network is actually taking to train. So this was the first trick that they did, was they used ReLU nonlinearity to achieve faster training. The second, which we have already discussed, is training on multiple GPUs. They did the training on two GPUs. They spread the net across two GPUs. Current GPUs, they say, are particularly well suited for cross GPU parallelization. Uh, Choosing the pattern of connectivity is a problem for cross validation, but this allows us to precisely tune the amount of communication until it is an acceptable fraction of the amount of computation. So you can see that this architecture of dividing between GPUs reduces their error rates by 1.7 and 1.2%. So for achieving this much reduction, they have trained, they finalized on using multiple GPUs for training their architecture. So these people have really gone to the extent of doing several things, doing several optimizations to get the best possible error rate and the state of the art model architecture, which is really excellent. Then we have the local response normalization. So essentially, what this means is that as we saw in the architecture, we have these feature maps. So here there are 96 feature maps. So what they are doing is that okay, so let's say this is, let's look at the different notations. So you have AI. AI is the activity of the neuron computed by applying a kernel I at position xy. However, this they are modifying by this operation which is called as local response normalization, which is essentially what they are doing is that so my understanding of this is, let's say there are these kernels, right? One, two, three, four. So 96 kernels, let's say, and you are looking at this specific kernel, this specific feature map which is extracted. Now, this let's say this has a certain specific value at this position, right? So what they are doing is that they are averaging this value across the kernel. So you go left and right and you compute the averages. How much you go by is dependent on this number n, which is fixed as 5 in this case. So essentially, what they are doing is that you this whole length, this total length is 5. So you're taking an average across the 5 neighboring kernels. That's why it goes from I minus n by 2 to I plus n by 2. So the total gap is n, which is 5 in this case. And then you're adding it with an amount k, which is also a hyperparameter, which is 2 in this case, and you're raising it by 0.75. So what happens because of this response normalization is that the top 1 and top 5 error rates are reduced by 1.4 and 1.2% respectively. They also give some intuition with respect to the relation of this function with actual biology, and they term it as brightness normalization. So they say that this sort of response normalization implements a form of lateral inhibition inspired by the type found in real neurons. So again, it introduces a reduction in error rate of more than 1.2%. The final thing that they do over here is overlapping pooling, which is similar to a max pooling layer that we currently use. And although the reduction here is not that much, it is zero point 0.4 and 0.3%. This is what you see by the max pool layers, which is mentioned over here. This is again applied for the first and the second layer itself. It's not applied for the layers that come a bit down the line. Okay, so let's move to the next section, which is called as reducing overfitting. So, as I said previously, Overfitting was considered to be a very primary problem at that time, and this was one of the main reasons probably why people were not using deeper and deeper networks. So, how to combat overfitting was something where people spend a lot of time on. So, what these people have done is that they have used this technique of data augmentation. What that means is that if you are feeding a certain images, you feed more number of images by either doing horizontal reflections or translations of that particular image itself. So this is essentially giving more images to the network, which are a subset of the existing images itself, but it avoids the network to overfit. This is the reason why they are extracting 224 by 224 patches and their horizontal reflection. So imagine an image which is reflected on itself. Both of these images are fed to the network simultaneously. Without this scheme, they say our networks suffers from substantial overfitting, which would have forced us to use much smaller networks. The second form of data augmentation consists of altering the intensities of RGB channels in the training images. To each training image, we add multiples of the found principal components. So basically, these are the eigenvectors p1, p2, p3 are the eigenvectors of the RGB pixel values, and they are multiplying it by a certain quantity. Alpha is a random variable, and uh, lambda 1, lambda 2, lambda 3 are the eigenvalues. So this actually helps them to reduce the top one error rate by more than 1%. Then they use dropout also. Dropout had become quite popular at that time. It was a recently introduced technique around the year 2012. I will do a separate session with respect to dropouts. Essentially, what happens in dropout is that you set to zero uh, the output of the hidden neuron with a probability of zero point 0.5. So in a certain layer, some neurons are activated and some are deactivated. So these neurons who are dropped out, they do not contribute to the forward pass, and then hence they do not contribute in the back propagation. So every time the input goes to the network, it essentially it sees a different architecture in front of it, and that helps them to reduce overfitting significantly. Without dropout, our network exhibits substantial overfitting. Okay, so this was the overall architecture which was mentioned in the figure, and these different tricks, dropouts, data augmentation for reducing overfitting. Then they have used ReLU, max pooling, local response normalization. You see, there are number of things, GPU computations. All of these things are kind of very neatly coming together in a single paper, which had never happened before. That is what made this paper extremely powerful, and the kind of results that they achieved. You can see top 1%, 37.5, which is almost around 8% lower than the next best. 17%, almost again 9% lower than the next best, which is really state of the art. And this was for the 2012 image visual recognition challenge. Here also, they are by far the best amongst all. Excellent again, and the extent that they have gone to even get 1% reduction rate is very commendable. Uh, these are some of the feature maps which the network has extracted. So this always interests me because right now when you look at this diagram, you see that there are 98 features, right, of size 55 by 55. But what exactly do these 98 feature maps represent after the entire network has learned? This is what is shown in this diagram. You can see that there are some kernels which are colored, some kernels are not colored. So I think these ones at the top are trying to detect some of the edges or some of the boundaries in the different images. Then these colors are probably detecting gradients in the color at the top, bottom right, somewhere in the center. Then a green shade in the middle. We see that a lot of CNNs actually give feature maps which look quite similar to this. And such extensive feature maps, I think, were not reported before in the literature. They also kind of mentioned how their algorithm performs. So, for example, this is a container ship. So, with highest probability, they do predict it's a container ship, but it also kind of represents like a lifeboat or a fireboat. Then this one has Dalmatian and grapes both. They do say it's Dalmatian, but the correct answer is cherry actually. Yeah, so it has cherry, which is not there in the top five. So this would be an error in their model. Here they say agaric and mushroom, even though mushroom is the one that is here. The image was labeled as grill, and their model predicts it's a convertible, which is actually correct. Here it's a leopard, which correctly predicts it's a leopard. It's a motor scooter over here. It also says that could be a go kart, could be a moped, etc. Then here I think they have tried to um, on the right test in the first column the remaining columns, okay, with the smallest Euclidean distance. So these are the nearest neighbors, which kind of makes sense. All of them, these are elephants, all of these are flowers, probably of the same species and same colors. All of this represent the ships, then dogs, pumpkins. So excellent. I mean, this was something which was state of the art at that time, and the way all these different things have come together, it is quite interesting. Let's look at the last paragraph that we'll be touching upon today is the discussion section. Our results show that a large deep convolutional network is capable of achieving record breaking results on a highly challenging dataset using purely supervised learning. It is notable that our network performance degrades if a single convolutional layer is removed. To simplify our experiments, we did not use any unsupervised pre-training. Ultimately, we would like to use very large and deep convolutional nets on video sequences where the temporal structure provides helpful information that is missing. So they mentioned somewhere in the introduction as well, I believe. Uh, so here in the last paragraph, all our experiments suggest that our results can be improved simply by waiting for faster GPUs and bigger data sets to become available. This is actually true nowadays. We have much bigger data sets, not that big, but and GPUs have become more faster and efficient. So these things have actually proven to be true. Yeah, so that completes our paper. Hopefully, you got a nice idea about how uh, deep convolutional networks were used to uh, get the state of the art results in the ImageNet challenge.